So I think a common question that crops up over the course of a watch enthusiast collection is, which flagship diver should I purchase? And for many, having a Rolex Submariner is simply unobtainable, or they don't want to spend over $10,000. So then two other brands typically crop up. One is the sister brand to Rolex, Tudor, and currently I have the Tudor Pelagos in my lineup. And then the other brand that usually comes up is Omega. And I think probably the most recognizable Omega in their sports lineup is the Seamaster. Now, over the course of this last year, I've actually cycled through 4 of these watches, 2 Omega Seamasters and 2 of the Tudor divers as well. So I want to quickly share my story of how I came to acquire these timepieces, and then I'll focus in a little more on each one and give you my thoughts on which one you should lean towards, just depending on what you want to use the watch for and what's currently in your watch rotation. You know, before there was a pandemic, I did travel a bit in the fall. I just visited some family in Germany, and while over in Europe, I really wanted to pick up my first Swiss luxury dive watch. Now, I didn't purchase anything there. I waited until I got back to London, Ontario, and then my first purchase, my first gateway, if you will, into the Swiss luxury divers, it was my Omega Seamaster, the non-wave dial ceramic version, which is the most recently discontinued version of this timepiece. Now, there's a lot to love about that specific Omega Seamaster. The finishing was amazing. The build quality was definitely there. For me, what ended up happening is I didn't enjoy wearing it on the bracelet as much as I thought. Now, that bracelet is extremely well constructed, but it doesn't taper at all. So it's a straight 20 all around your wrist, and the clasp I found was just a little bit restrictive. So over the course of about 3 or 4 months, I thought, you know, maybe I should move this Omega Seamaster along and maybe pick up Tudor Black Bay 58, which is a really hot watch at that time, and heck, it's still a hot watch right now. So I ended up listing the Omega Seamaster, and there was strong interest from another watch enthusiast that I know who's fairly local to me, and he was willing to just buy that watch straight out with cash. We were about to actually complete the transaction, and he just happened to mention off the cuff, so like, what watch are you going to move towards next? And I mentioned, well, I'm really looking to get a Black Bay 58. It's kind of hot right now. Maybe I'll have to go on a wait list. But he actually mentioned, you know what? I actually have a 58, and maybe we can actually do a trade. So I did end up trading the Omega Seamaster for the Black Bay 58. And that was an amazing watch. Ultimately, though, I just found it was a little too small for my wrist, which is 19 centimeters in circumference, or about 7.5 inches. So after a few months wearing the Black Bay 58, very comfortable watch, I thought it was a little undersized for a diver. So my brother and I were walking along the Bruce Trail one day in a fairly remote part of the Niagara Escarpment, and unbeknownst to me, the same watch enthusiast that I did the deal with for the Black Bay 58 was walking on this trail too, and I didn't really say anything to him, but he actually passed us and he's like, "Oh, are you wearing the Black Bay 58 today?" So then we started talking, and I'm like, you know, I'm kind of thinking of moving it on. And he remarked too, he's like, well, I actually miss having that in my collection. And to me, I wanted to get back into the Omega Seamaster, the most current version that's out right now, with the ceramic wave dial and the upgraded caliber 8800 movement in it. So surprise, surprise, this guy actually had that in his collection. So we did another trade. He got his Black Bay 58 back. I got the most current iteration of the Omega Seamaster. Now, that watch did have some significant upgrades over the previous iterations of the Seamaster, and personally I really enjoyed wearing it. It was a little bit bulkier than the older Seamasters, and the same problem still persisted for me with the bracelet. It was a non-tapering bracelet, extremely well constructed, but I just didn't find it was very comfortable to wear for long periods of time. So ultimately, I did end up moving that watch along, and then a little further down the line, in fact, over the past 3 weeks, I've been wearing the TUDOR Pelagos. And so far, I think it makes a great flagship diver. It's definitely more of a tool dive watch, but it does fit very well in with my current rotation. So I guess when looking at the two most current offerings that I've had, either this TUDOR Pelagos or the current iteration of the Omega Seamaster, you might be wondering, well, if I can only pick one, which one should I lean towards? And I would honestly say this: if you're just looking for that one watch collection and for a flagship dive watch that can be suitable for most occasions, then I would lean towards the Omega Seamaster. In the general public, I do think Omega has a little more cachet. You know, it's been stylized more in fashion and in movies with like James Bond films. And the overall finishing of the watch is a lot better than either the Tudor Black Bay 58 or the Pelagos. Moreover, when you're considering the in-house movements between both brands, I do think that the Omega Caliber 8800 does beat out the Tudor MT5612 in a couple of key different metrics. Now, while this Tudor does have a 70-hour power reserve, which is about 20 hours longer than the Omega Caliber 8800 is basically amagnetic with a silicone hairspring. It goes through a METIS certification, which does have more scrutiny when considering shock, low temperatures, and other environmental stresses than the Tudor Caliber does. On the whole, the accuracy of both movements is very similar. The METIS certification is a little bit better in terms of scrutiny, but both of them I found run between 2 to +3 seconds per day. And another consideration too is that you can actually see the Omega Caliber 8800 movement through the display caseback of the Omega Seamaster, whereas all of the Tudor and Rolex watches have pretty much closed casebacks on any dive watch you purchased from them. So where does the Tudor pull ahead? I think it suits me in my current situation where I have a couple of other everyday flagship watches that pair very well with a dive watch. And that includes my Rolex Explorer and my Grand Seiko SBGN 003 Quartz GMT watch. Because those watches are more of everyday pieces and they're a little more dressy, I really like having the option of having a very strong tool watch in the collection as well. Now, with respect to the design of these divers, I do think that the Tudor has some of the best bezel action in the business. It's much more refined than the Omega Seamaster that has a scalloped bezel, which is a little bit harder to grip, and the action isn't as refined as you would find it on the Tudor. Additionally, when it comes to things like water depth rating, the Tudor Pelagos is 500 meters water resistant, whereas the Seamaster is 300 meters. And then related to that with the helium escape valve, I really appreciate that Tudor has an integrated helium escape valve on the side of the case that's flush with the case, and you don't have this like toothpaste cap sticking out at the 10 o'clock like you do on an Omega Seamaster. So in general, I do find that the Tudor bracelets and clasp are more comfortable than on the Omega Seamaster. You get a very nice taper on these 3-link bracelets, and their clasps have a fold-over security mechanism here. So it holds it in place a little more securely, I find, than with just the twin trigger buttons on the side of the Omega Seamaster clasp. And then you might also want to consider the materials for these watches. Specifically with the Pelagos, you're getting a full titanium case and bracelet, whereas Omega uses 316L surgical stainless steel, which is definitely brushed a little bit better, but with the titanium case mixed with the matte blue dial here, I do find that the legibility of the Tudor is slightly better. So guys, that's my story of how I cycled through a few of these divers within the course of 1 year, and I'm happy to share my personal thoughts on which one you should lean towards if you only had to choose one of these flagship brands for a dive watch. But hey, I always like to hear your guys' feedback. Make sure to leave it in the description of this video. So as always guys, stay safe and I'll catch you in the next video.